Here we are, folks, back with episode 2 of the Resistor Vic podcast. And tonight I'm very excited to have with me Democratic Party candidate for the United States Senate. She will be running in the primary against John Hickinlooper. We have Karen Breslin. We're going to talk with her, answer some questions. I got a long list of questions, see how many we can get through. And then I will tell you a little bit about who I'm going to have on next week. And keep in mind, folks, this is the first time I've interviewed anybody. Karen, welcome.
Well, thank you, Vic. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be your first guest.
Let's start with who is Karen Breslin?
Well, my resume is I'm a political science professor. I've been doing that for several decades. I am a lawyer. I was a journalist before that. I covered Congress and the executive branch, the regulatory side of the federal government. And I worked for 25 years for the National Park Service in various capacities, chief of communications and legislation. And I retired as senior policy advisor to the regional director. So I have a long history and involvement with federal policy and federal agencies. And I have been teaching American government-related courses, law-related courses for literally decades. I have been in Colorado most of my life. I'm a native of Kentucky, but we moved here when I was about 8 or 9, and I stayed here for a few years. We moved back to Kentucky, and then we came back here when I was in high school.
All right, here's question number 2. How do you see yourself on the political spectrum?
Well, I think the political spectrum is a little bit misleading these days. I call myself a progressive. I've always aligned with the left. The left for me stands for working people, stands for working class interests. It stands for challenges to unaccountable power. It stands for standing up for the little guy. Those are all values that I adhere to. So every time I hear Trump or even the centrist Democrats talk about that the Democratic Party has gone too far left, I think they're nuts. And so I don't really understand what people mean by these terms anymore, because the Democratic Party has not gone very left at all in terms of what the left has traditionally believed in. So I use the term progressive because that seems to align me with the people that I track with most closely on policy, people like Bernie Sanders and AOC.
I personally, as a voter in Colorado, that's exactly what I'm looking for in a Democrat, because when I look at so many of our Democrats, in particular our current 2 senators, they are not left, not even a little bit. They are Reagan Republicans. If this was 1980, they would definitely be Reagan Republicans. So when I think of when I was running for Congress back in the way back times, I called myself an FDR Democrat.
Yes.
Because FDR, to me, embodies exactly what this party is supposed to be.
I find myself referring to FDR too for exactly that reason. This party was built, that coalition, that FDR coalition was built among working people, marginalized people. And yet the Democratic Party has strayed away from those roots. And I think we've got to get back to it.
You ran for Congress in CD4 a few years back. Tell us about that and what's different.
Well, before I ran in CD4, I actually ran against Michael Bennet in 2022. And I did that because I'd spent most of my life trying to figure out how to deal with the major issues of our day. That's been a motivation of mine from a very young age. How do we make this country a more fair, just place? And that led me into political science, into journalism, into law. And by the time I'd reached, whatever age I was then, I looked around at my career and I simply saw things getting worse. That not only had the promise of the civil rights movement not been fully achieved, not only had we not really rounded the corner on protecting the environment, not only had we not moved away from war as an answer to international disagreements and conflicts, we've now really fully embraced elite leadership of our society and the values that seem to be associated with that, which is that only rich people are supposed to seek public office, only career politicians are supposed to aspire to serve the public in an elected capacity. And so all of that fueled my desire to run against Michael Bennet. And at that point, it was almost an experimental effort on my part because I had not been involved in Democratic Party politics. I had never been invited in recent years. I was a Jimmy Carter Democrat back in the day, and I worked for Carter and did a few things for other Democratic candidates all the way back. But after the Clintons got into the mix, I parted company with the Democratic Party. So I didn't have connections in the party. I had never sought political office before. I had no idea really what I was getting into, but I wanted to see if I could push the policy conversation in a different direction. Because the truth is, the Democratic Party ignores so many of the important issues of our day. And I expect the Republicans too. So it's not that I'm just picking on Democrats. I expect that of Republicans. I don't expect it of Democrats. And so what are those issues? Racial injustice, economic injustice, mass incarceration, environmental destruction. We can go on the list. And so I thought, what happens if I show up and I offer these ideas? And, we had a handful of volunteers. I didn't even try to raise money. I wanted to understand what I could accomplish just at a purely idea level. And what we accomplished was that there was a decent amount of interest in what we had to say. And we got 19% of the vote at the state assembly, needing 30 to get on the ballot. We spent less than $5,000. So that experience convinced me that there was an appetite in the party for a more serious conversation about the systemic problems that plague this country. And so when the CD4 race came around, I thought, well, maybe this is another opportunity for me to see how this process works and serve this community if a Democrat could conceivably be elected. I live in a rural area. I've been in a rural community for a very long time. I think I understand rural people and rural issues, and I thought that I could bring that to the CD4 race. So that's how I got into that.
So it sounds like what you're telling me is that your previous runs were training grounds.
Well, I think everybody who runs learns a lot about what you didn't know. I mean, I think there's an expectation that if you run and lose, then you should just sort of pack it up and go home and call it a day. But the reality is the vast majority of people who are ultimately elected have run before because it requires name recognition and you have to understand something about the process. Bernie Sanders has pointed out that he has run many times. I think he ran 3 or 4 times before he ultimately won. And so we have to normalize loss, which is hard to do when you put your heart and soul into something, right? But you have to kind of normalize the loss and you have to normalize the learning. And every campaign, I'm sure, creates a learning exercise. But your underlying point is exactly right. I'm much more suited for the Senate race than I am for a congressional district race. And partly that's because of my orientation to these issues as a political science person, the work that I've done as a lawyer and my work in the federal government and as a journalist. I've really been focused on national issues. I do have significant federal policy knowledge, and that I do think I can bring to bear. I've done a bit of constitutional litigation, so I know a thing or two about how the Constitution is supposed to work. And so for all of those reasons, the Senate does seem like a race that is appropriate to me in a way that maybe the CD4 race was less so.
I wasn't thinking about you when I made this video yesterday or today, the one that I published today. But I talk about the need to elect lawyers again because you look at so many people in Congress and they're just so, I'm sorry, but brain dead.
And I also think the whole career ladder idea that people have about politicians, that you serve at a local office and then you work your way up to a state and then maybe you get into a federal position, that doesn't make all the sense in the world either, because if you've spent a lot of time with the state legislature, how does that tell you about federal policy issues? Do you understand how an agency makes a regulatory rule and what that process is and what the implications of those rules are? The career politician route doesn't seem to be necessarily the best route all the time. And there's plenty of people who can go that route and do a fine job. I'm not suggesting that. But I think that the assumption that you're disqualified if you didn't go that route, to me, just doesn't make logical sense. And honestly,
I was just going to say, I know people, Jonathan Singer up in Boulder County in Longmont. He was Excellent example. So was Andrew Romanoff, of people who did work their way up through, and they'd always been party stalwarts, but they were also excellent representatives of the people. They were the kind of politicians that we only see once in a great while. It was the party who kicked them to the curb. It was the party who interfered and said, no, those aren't our chosen ones. So, yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for working your way up. And I think there's a great big argument for not working your way up, because somebody who hasn't spent a lifetime in party politics is not culted into the party, if you will. And I think we've seen enough of cults here lately.
Yeah.
So you kind of answered my question number 4 already about what makes you want to be a senator. So let's jump to the next one. Tell me about how your campaign. Oh, did you have something on that to add?
Yeah. One of the advantages of the background that I've had is that when you look at the issues that plague our country, I think I've got a pretty good background for understanding why things are the way they are. And what, you referenced FDR at the start of our conversation, maybe before we were recording, but FDR had dreams for the country, which was how we emerged from the Great Depression. And in the last 40, 50 years, the Democratic Party has pretty much stopped dreaming big. Bill Clinton ends welfare as we know it, but doesn't worry about ending poverty as we know it. I think that what's missing, and has been missing for literally decades, is a vision of how this country can function better. And, so I have a slogan that my campaign manager came up with: bold leadership for a better tomorrow. And I think it takes boldness to imagine that we don't have to have people sleeping on the streets. We don't have to have the high levels of substance abuse. We don't have to have veterans going without the care that they need. We don't need children to go to bed hungry. We don't need to be polluting our air and our water. We don't need to rely on force as a way of resolving international conflicts. But that's just the way it is. And so this embrace of just the way it is a lot of what's wrong with our society, and it's entirely unnecessary. And I believe that we can make this country work better for the majority of the people with the right policies. And that's really why I want to go to the Senate, to highlight all the people in this society who are left behind by politics as usual.
Well, that sounds a lot more aspirational than the current guy, who has pretty much been incognito for the last 5 years, and then voted for not one, but 2 of the worst cabinet nominees for Trump in the Interior Department and the Energy Department. Both of these guys are avowed anti-climate change policy people. I'm really happy to hear that I have a candidate I'll be able to support who can have a much more aspirational looking forward. And I've got a listener question that's going to go back to what you were talking about a second ago. But I'm happy to hear that. And it kind of helps me segue into this next question. So tell us about how your campaign's going so far.
Well, I've been able to get in front of medium-sized crowds and small groups, and they're reacting very well. There is definitely a shift in the political landscape based on what I can see on our social media feedback, what I can see when I'm out talking to people. People are tired of the status quo. And the fatigue goes beyond, like, I sure wish there was fresh blood. People think that. But what they really are fed up with is the dysfunction, is the fact that things just don't get better, that the struggles persist, that there's not vision. There's not a vision that's clearly articulated by our elected officials, and yet they want to see a change. And that is part of the complaint that people have with Hickinlooper, that what does he stand for? If you close your eyes and you think about Bernie Sanders and what he stands for, it isn't too hard to come up with something. But you close your eyes and you think about Hickinlooper, and it's either fuzz or some pro-corporate thing. And people are just not comfortable with continuing to have a political system that just serves the elite interests of our society. We've got a large number of volunteers who have stepped up. We've got a core group of volunteers, a lot of whom are young people who have expressed an interest in the campaign, want to try to see change, because they've really got the most at stake in some ways as compared to people of my generation. They understand what they're up against, and they understand how dysfunctional the political system is, and they've been coming out supporting my campaign. We were at the Democratic Party's event last weekend called DemFest, and I don't know, I think there was 1,000, 1,500 people. I'm not sure what the final totals were, but we had a very significant presence there, a goodly number of volunteers. We had a lot of people sign our sheet for, staying in touch or volunteering. And so I think that I can say, I feel quite confident that with more name recognition and more money, that Hickinlooper will have a run for his seat.
Well, that sounds like a perfect opportunity for me to ask you, how can people volunteer? Where do they go to volunteer for Karen Breslin?
To our website. And it's breslinforcolorado.com. And my name is spelled Breslin. And we have a place to sign up for updates on the campaign, and also places to sign up for volunteering.
And surely there's a donate button on that page somewhere.
Absolutely, more than one.
So how is the financing so far? Are you taking PAC money? Or are you going to, if Kellogg Corporation come along and said, we want to help your campaign, what are you going to tell them?
No. I believe, and I say this as a political science professor, so I don't think I could be accused of being naive about it. But I do believe in grassroots political power. And we're seeing that with this campaign. We absolutely are. And it's kind of, it's humbling to me that people are stepping forward because they see potential in this campaign to really create change. And I agree that we can and will. Money goes far, but it doesn't prevail all of the time. People power matters. And one of my messages in this campaign is, let's take our power back. The money is a shortcut for them. It allows them to not have to mingle with the people. It allows them to stay away from the actual concerns and interests that we all have. And they can just...
That's a great way to put it.
They can, send out their ads and, cover the airwaves and do all of the things that they do. Money is a substitute for the actual hard work of getting to know the voters. And I think that is a lot of what's wrong with our political system right now. So do I wish we had a lot more money? Yes, and we're going to try to raise a lot more money. But I do not believe that money is the determining factor of who is going to prevail in this political climate. Maybe it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and so on. But in this particular moment, I think that people have really found some momentum and some energy around reclaiming their role in this political process.
I ran for state house many, many years ago, again, in a district I had no chance of winning. And then I ran for Congress, and all those times, one of the ideas drilled into me was you have to have your top 3 issues. What are your top 3 issues?
Fighting fascism. Trump's tactics of dividing and conquering, the endorsement and sort of fetishization of violence that sort of marks Trump and everything that he's about. These thugs, these ICE thugs that are going in and doing, the things that they're doing is all about celebrating violence and power. That's a very fascistic thing. This strongman persona, people having pins with his face on it. It's just completely absurd.
Seems like we've seen that somewhere before in history. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Exactly. And so my feeling about this moment is that we're dealing with fascism in real time. And resisting that is job one. The foundations of our democracy are being eroded. Trump has already ignored court rulings. He's already decimated the federal civil service, which is the protection that we have as citizens from a corrupt government bureaucracy. He's gutted various facets of the governmental functions, which causes people to lose faith in them. And so, writing that and putting the presidency back into the box that it belongs in terms of what the Constitution requires, is really job one. And that's a people's job too. Leaders can go so far with that, but it takes all of the rest of us carrying our weight and, pushing in that direction as well. Now, what helps resist fascism is standing for the needs of regular people who work for a living, earn a paycheck, marginalized people. If a political system does not respond to the needs of the majority of Americans, and it hasn't for decades, then that political system becomes unstable. And that instability opens a door to somebody like Trump. So turning the Democratic Party toward the needs of ordinary people. In terms of what we need economically, the majority of us need very similar things. And the Democratic Party has stepped away from that, as Bernie Sanders has said it so well, so often. So you want to fight fascism, stand for working and marginalized people, and rebuild that FDR coalition and really take control over the political environment. The Democrats react. Oh, the Republicans, win by being tough on immigration. Well, then we'll mimic toughness on immigration too. Oh, the Republicans win by talking about business and business interests and, getting the criminals off the street. Well, then we'll respond by offering our own version of that. Well, it's Republican-like politics. It's exactly the opposite of what we need in this moment to defeat fascism. So those two issues. And then the third is the environment. Ecologically, we are in serious difficulty, all over the globe. And we haven't had serious conversations about environmental destruction in decades. Climate change is a facet of the destruction. It's a symptom of it, but it's not the entirety of it. And so we're not talking about biodiversity. We're not talking about a loss of soils. We're not talking about persistent air pollution. We're not talking enough about persistent chemicals in the environment, in human bodies, et cetera. And so those are the three things that I really am focusing on. Stopping fascism, standing for working people and marginalized people, and the environment.
I got to say, I watch so many interviews because I'm a political junkie. So I watch candidate interviews, and almost never do you ask somebody a question and you get all the answers to the question you asked. So thank you for that.
I think that's the reporter in me coming out, because when I would ask politicians questions and they would, dance around it and come up with all kinds of stuff other than like the actual answer, I found that deeply annoying. So.
Okay, 6 years from now, let's suppose that everything that goes the way you want it to, and you've just been sworn in a couple of months ago, and now you got 6 years to do your job. 6 years from that point, how should the voters judge you on your performance?
Well, let's hope that by 2026, this is still a conversation, that elections will go forward and they will be elections that are fair and legitimate and so on. But assuming that all of those things are true, then there's a good chance we beat back fascism, at least to some extent, if not in its entirety. If we haven't, then I would say in 6 years' time as an elected official, I should be judged on that. Have we restored our constitutional republic to its proper constitutional foundations? So that's job one, because without putting our democracy back together again, we are always at risk of tyranny. And one of the things that law school impressed upon me was the beauty of our Constitution. I'd always been, grateful that we have the system of government that we do. But when you find out that the Constitution really does restrain government power, really does control what the branches can do, and that courts are pretty good about upholding it, not always, and not always in the way I would like or prefer, Roe versus Wade being overturned, a clear example of that, but enough to where the system of government is still recognizably controllable. It, protects us, the system of government. We're protected from tyrannical power. So that's one thing to judge me on. The next thing to judge me on is whether I have been able to collaboratively push forward on one of these, and hopefully more than one, but one of these key legislative agenda items like Medicare for all, like raising the minimum wage, like fair tax treatment for middle income people, because we're not taxed in a fair way. When the largest corporations and the wealthiest people can somehow skirt their tax liability and the rest of us put our pennies together to pay our share, it's just profoundly unfair. And, you know, have we made strides in protecting the rights of the most vulnerable people in our society, the marginalized people in our society? And so if I can come back to Colorado with that list of accomplishments, then you will be able to judge me as a success.
All right, hold on. I'm going to interrupt you here for a second because you put something in my head and I got to get this out there. So I am loath to ask a candidate to make a promise because they want to please you, say, I promise to do that with no intention, or they will say that they promise and conveniently forget or whatever. But I am going to ask you to promise me something.
Okay.
So there's a piece of legislation in Congress. The Senator Merkley from Oregon, American Hedge Fund Control. I can't remember the exact name. Basically, it would have
the Stop Wall Street Fraud Act.
No, this one would say that all of the hedge funds have to get out of the housing business.
Oh, okay, that is a different.
Okay, now, and I'm not going to ask you to promise to support that or that idea, but Jeff Merkley has put that bill forward for a few years now. Ken Buck, when he was a representative for CD4, made a whole lot of hay out of telling people about this tax cut bill that he proposed. Politicians who purposely propose bills for the headlines to say, look at this legislation I proposed, but can provide no evidence of ever fighting for it. If you ever did that, then I would consider you a failure. So I'm asking you to promise that you will never do that.
That's an easy promise for me to make. I would never do that. I am. I don't like games. I don't like dishonesty. I don't like deception. I don't care who does it. I don't like it. That kind of stuff, I don't like it. I don't like when people are misleading about what they're actually doing. I don't like telling people that you've introduced a bill and leading people to think that that's a meaningful gesture all by itself. And that's a kind of standard political thing. And if I introduce a bill, I will do so and fight like hell for it. And I think this is the other thing that annoys me. You know, when I was covering Congress, so much of what the legislative agenda of Congress is special interest oriented. They are, you know, little Ralphie in A Christmas Story. You know, he wants that damn BB gun and he's not going to rest until he gets that BB gun. Well, lobbyists are like that too. And Congress is Santa. And they hop on Santa's lap with a handout and a request. And sometimes it's a tweak to a law. Sometimes it's a tax break. But they're always working Congress to get what they want. And, you know, where's the people's business in all of that? And sometimes it's in there somewhere, but the people's business does not often rise to the top. And we can see this with this big, beautiful bullshit bill, that this isn't about the interests of the people. So yes, I can make that promise to you that if I come to Colorado selling an initiative that I think is really important and I go back to Washington and do nothing to pass it, I will have broken my promise to you, Vic, and I would not do that.
I feel almost silly asking this next question because I feel like you've pointed it out pretty good already. But I'm going to ask you just in case there's anything that you want to add to it. How would a Senator Breslin differ from a Senator Hickinlooper?
Well, we really are a night and day. For one thing, I come from the people I want to represent in the sense that I am not from money. I am not from elite circles. And Hickinlooper isn't either, but that is the place he occupies now. He's worth, I don't know, I read estimates between $23 and $48 million. It depends on how much equity I have in my house as to how much I'm actually worth. I know what it's like to struggle to, you know, maintain a standard of living, to hope that you've got a retirement that'll sustain you in your later years. That's one difference, two differences maybe. The other main thing is what you and I have already sort of discussed. I think Hickenlooper wants to avoid at all costs answering a question with a direct answer. And I've listened to a couple of his town halls, and he's pretty good at it. But people are wise to it. And often he'll start an answer with, when I was Denver mayor, when I was governor of Colorado. Well, dude, you're neither of those things now. You are senator from the state of Colorado, and people are asking you about how you're doing your job now. And I didn't mean to be disrespectful with the dude. You know, he's a public servant. He's worked hard. He deserves respect. So I take that back. And you can kind of hear the palpable frustration from people who are listening to him, like, you were asked about now, not what you did before. And so he has an aversion to answering questions directly. But I think the bigger difference between us is he sees public policy through a business owner's lens. And I'm a business owner. I have a law firm. My family had a small print shop when I was in college, and we fell on hard times during the 80s recession situation that hurt many Coloradans.
But I thought Reagan was the end-all, save-all.
Well, you probably remember that didn't work out for a lot of us, right? And we lost our home to foreclosure, in fact, as a result of, all of that. We lost our business and our home. So I understand the value of small business. And this is another thing. Small businesses need support in this economy, and the federal government doesn't do enough to do that. But Hickenlooper sees policy through a business owner's lens. And that's an important and appropriate lens for a lot of, public policy issues, but it is not the proper way to understand what government does. Efficiency is always important, but government has a public trust. It's public service oriented, and businesses are not that. Businesses are about the bottom line. Businesses are about profit. And so Hickenlooper has in my view anyway, a very restrained vision of what government can be, because he thinks about it as a business owner who was regulated by the government. As you said, sort of that Republican orientation about government being bad because it infringes upon freedom. And there's, those are legitimate concerns at times, but it shouldn't be the animating vision of your political platform that, collaboration between government and business is the way to solve public policy problems. Number one, government and business leaves out the voters.
Hey, real quick, let's say one more time, where can people go to support your campaign?
BreslinForColorado.com. And we're on most all social media platforms except X.
They can sign up to volunteer to do all the things like phone banking, postcards, canvassing. Yes. All that. All right. This question in here, don't think that this question isn't coming from Vic, the podcast guy. This question is, if I walk up to you on the street, what question do you have for me?
As Karen, just Karen, or Karen as politician Karen?
Karen, the Senate candidate.
I want to know what's on your mind. What are you concerned about? What issues are weighing on you? What do you want me to know as a Senate candidate?
Okay. That one was a short and easy one.
Well, it's partly because I'm asking a lot.
Right.
And I'm getting pretty consistent answers. People are extremely upset about Trump's incursions on our democracy. I mean, they just can't believe it's happening. And they can't believe that the Democratic Party has been so ineffective in responding to that threat. And
have you and Hickenlooper been in the same place yet, talking to a crowd?
Talking to a crowd, let me think. I think on a Zoom we might have been. I think on a Zoom.
I'm wondering how he's been responding to that kind of angst from the voters.
Well,
when he's on the stage with you. If that hasn't happened, that's fine.
We've been, I do something, then I go away, and then, and we haven't even crossed paths that much, just a few times. He was at the DemFest event, and they, I don't know why they did this, but we had a table up on kind of a mezzanine area, and our table was right on the edge of the mezzanine, and then down the steps, they had Hickenlooper hold forth. But they did try to prevent me from talking. I don't know if I told you that. But
No, you didn't. So tell me more about that. When you say they, are you talking about the campaigns or the state party?
What happened was we had reached out early on to arrange for a table, and we intended to have as much of a presence there as we could muster. We had a very strong presence there. And so they knew I wanted a table, and they eventually put out a little bit of information about the event, and they had this thing called Candidate Orama. And so we raised our hand on that. We'd like to participate in Candidate Orama. And it took a few days, but we got word back that, okay, we'll do that. And then a little bit before the event, I think it was sometime last week, they said we would have, I think, 3 minutes, and they didn't know the exact speaking order because there was a lot of candidates speaking, right? And they would get back to us about the speaking order. Well, we didn't hear anything. And then Colorado Democratic Party put out a Facebook, probably other social media too, I just saw it on Facebook, with a listing of the candidates who were going to speak at Candidate Orama. And guess who was left off?
Imagine that. You know what's really ironic about that is the state party sent out to all of us local party officers about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, an email telling us how important it is that as party officials, we remain neutral in all of the primary races. And I'm just shocked, I tell you, that Shad Mirib was not remaining neutral.
I don't know who was responsible, so I don't necessarily want to point fingers, but that kind of tipped us off that maybe we weren't going to speak. And so then there was a conversation, and we were told, you're not going to speak. And there was a certain amount of fuss kicked up about that, and then they relented. But meanwhile, they're handing out programs to all of the attendees, glossy brochure type things, and I'm nowhere to be seen. So if you were an active Democrat, came to DemFest, wanted to know if Hickinlooper had any opposition, you would not know it from that brochure. Now, we still got to a lot of people, and I was able to speak. So, I think the silencing didn't work as well as they wanted it to. But it was upsetting to me to the extent that they didn't give us the courtesy of telling us. So I could have, had we not seen that post, I would have shown up the next day expecting to speak. And that would have been really unpleasant and awkward. So I don't know. But honestly, I think that these tactics are not going to work anymore. I mean,
all right, I'm going to say right now, for everybody that watches this podcast episode, what Karen just told you about right now, I've experienced that as a candidate when I was running for Congress. And if this kind of thing infuriates you like it does me, then go to Karen's site right now and drop at least $5. More if you got it, because this kind of thing, the only way to fight back against that kind of party insider stuff, the party trying to tell us who our candidate's going to be instead of letting the process fill out. The only way to combat that kind of stuff is to send the candidates money directly. Do not donate to the state party. Do not donate to the DNC, because those monies are going to go to their preferred candidates, guaranteed. And go to donate. I'm sorry, you got me all worked up now, because I know that that's happened. I believe it, and it really pisses me off, because just a couple of days ago, I started to give Shad Mirib some credit, because I've been railing against him a lot in my videos over the last several months. And I gave him some credit the other day. I said I was hopeful that maybe things are going to turn around and be more positive. But when was StimFest? Last weekend? So I was wrong.
Well, they did.
Go and donate to Karen right
now. When I say us, I just mean it takes a team of people, right? But they did let me speak. And, and so that, they did relent, and they did give in. And we did have a very nice position for the table. We really did. Like, we had a lot of visibility. You came up the mezzanine, there we were, numerous volunteers and all of our stuff. And so
did my face get all red over that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. That when I heard all of it.
Okay.
So I can, I was pretty annoyed by the whole thing. And more than anything, I think that it's it's part of why we're in the mess that we're in, which is really what you're referring to, Vic. Like, would we have Trump if the Democratic Party didn't try to fix the process and control it? And by fix it, I mean control it. I don't mean make it better. I think that their desire to try to silence Bernie, their, as you point out, these machinations on behalf of, favored candidates. I think that's a lot of why our democracy is at the dire state that it is right now. And partly this campaign is resistance to that. We the people should not be silenced in that way. Every candidate should have a shot. And that's basic democracy.
Sean, aka Shiny Beard, he wants to know your thoughts on AI regulations and guardrails.
So this AI regulation thing is a clear dividing point between myself and Hickinlooper. When the last time I heard Hickinlooper talk about this, and he's talked about it a couple of times, he talked about it when he was running for president, and then I think he gave a speech like in December, fairly recently. And he believes that AI companies should have the opportunity to self-police, but he wants third parties to be able to monitor. Trust but verify is that sort of framework. And I think that is a dangerous approach for all kinds of reasons. For one thing, AI, as I understand it, is a technology that potentially poses an existential threat. And so do you take a technology that is as dangerous as that and then let the businesses manage their own regulatory compliance? I don't think you do. I think you need...
Surely you don't think they would put profits first.
No, not at all. So this is why we have government, to control abusive and predatory corporate practices. And we need to stop being afraid to use government power to protect people, because that's what it's necessary for. It's not going to happen any other way, to your point, right? Companies are going to continue to do things that are abusive. And government is the only thing that can stop it. That and some consumer resistance. But with AI, a dangerous technology like that, it absolutely needs to be the government. And then this third party thing, well, the way I envision that, and I don't think I'm wrong, is you get this whole consultant class that comes up. And where does the consultant class come from? It comes out of the AI companies. Right? So there's kind of a sweetheart situation there. And that already happens with regulatory agencies and businesses. But you can control that with legislation, which frankly, I think we should. But in Hickinlooper's scheme, there's really no way to control it. So I believe that it needs to be regulated. I believe that there needs to be a panel convened, something like the clean air panels that EPA runs on clean air, and they have other ones on other topics, and get some expertise to the table, academics, people who don't have a financial stake in the outcome, and think about for a long term what the risks are of AI to our economy, to workers, and to just the existence of our species. And Hickinlooper seems to be more inclined to kind of be more trusting of that industry, and I'm less trusting of industry generally. And I think that's where his business mindset really affects his view of things.
I'm glad this question came up, because it wasn't on my list originally, and I'm just now starting to learn about AI, but I wasn't aware of Hickinlooper's position there yet. Now I am. You've educated a voter today. Thank you very much. Wow. We have monopolies in everything. Our meat industry is monopolized. Our grocery stores are monopolized. So the idea that somebody else within your industry is going to be that third-party watchdog is really laughable at best.
That way.
And I can't say I'm surprised that Hickinlooper would take that position.
The pressure is that the United States is in competition with China to be the leader in this field. And the U.S., as I understand it, has the advantage at this point. And the fear is that if the industry is overregulated, that advantage goes away because the innovation declines. That's the theory, right? But to me, this calls for an international regulatory effort in the same way that nuclear weapons do. And so that's that's the leadership that I think the United States ought to be putting on the table if that hasn't happened already. And to my knowledge, it hasn't.
Well, I think it's pretty safe to say with this administration that that's not happening.
Exactly. That is exactly right. But Democrats need to push it.
Most definitely. Doughboy says he's interested in knowing if you're willing to act independent of Schumercrats, support an oppositional leader for Democratic senators, and block judicial nominees, whatever she can, just the same as Tommy Tuberville did when it came to military promotions, and hold up the entire process to get concessions.
Yeah, I'm
That's a big one.
definitely more than happy to be disruptive in opposition to Schumer.
So does that mean that you will support somebody else as leader?
Yes.
If the Democratic caucus in the Senate does, by a narrow margin, reelect Schumer to be the leader, will you be ready to act independent of him and, like Doughboy asked, do like Tommy Tuberville did and throw whatever wrench in the works you can, whether or not Schumer...
Yeah, I mean, with a caveat that it would be wise and appropriate to consult other people who are of like mind and to develop a strategy collaboratively about how to do that.
Last week, if anybody knew the movie that I was in, and David came up with it, I think it was David. God, I hope I didn't get that wrong. Anyway, the movie was 13 Souls. It was originally called Diggers. I played Mayor Dick Dickerson. I do want to thank Karen for taking her time, all this time out of your evening to answer questions and answering them, actually answering questions. That's something that's kind of unusual to see from candidates. I very much appreciate that you actually answered them. What is your parting question or shot or statement to the voters?
We can shake this political system up. Grassroots power is power, but we don't do it by believing that we are inevitably screwed. We don't do it by bowing down to the Democratic Party establishment that wants us to coronate, is that the word? I think it is the word, to just bless John Hickenlooper as the Democratic Party's nominee. And we don't do it by thinking this campaign is a lost cause, therefore I'm not going to pay any attention to it. We are not a lost cause. We are a very serious effort. We've got people working really, really hard and really smart, capable people at that. And we can do this thing. We can mount a serious challenge to John Hickenlooper. We need to get the word out. I need everyone to share about my campaign across social media, because the news media won't cover us until we have more, kind of a critical mass out there in the world.
Until you have $1 million in the bank.
Exactly. And, we're making impressive strides. I'm extremely happy with the way things are going right now. Because honestly, I had no idea how things were going to go. It was just, we're going to do this and we're going to see how it goes, and it's going really well. But we really need, house parties. People want to do that. Get in touch with us for that. Help us as a volunteer and find people to donate. Ask other people to donate as you did tonight, Vic, because I won't take corporate money. I won't take APAC money. And that means I am reliant on grassroots donations. But if we want to fight this entrenched power that tries to control our democracy and served us Donald Trump, this is how we do it.
All righty then. Next week, I'm going to talk with, before I get to there, you can find the podcast on Substack, YouTube, and Spotify, and I am now on Apple Podcasts. I'm working on getting on iHeart, so please share, subscribe. The paid subscribers to my Substack are going to get a longer version of this interview because I don't want it to be an hour long, because people told me they don't want hour longs. So I will be editing it down. There you go. Follow me on my other stuff on all of those platforms, plus TikTok and Instagram. And which platforms are you on, Karen?
Threads, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok.
Okay, and it's Breslin for Colorado, right? Okay, go and follow her on all those platforms too to stay up to date with her campaign. Now, next week, I am going to interview a friend, an author. His name is Bob C. He is a 1 or 2 year retired band teacher from a very red part of our district. He was also one of my campaign volunteers when I ran for Congress back in 2014, who then ran for Congress in that same seat the next time. So there's lots of good stuff, but we're going to talk about his book, The Bookseller's Son, his latest book. And he asked me to read it and review it. And I haven't told him yet what my review is, but I'm going to tell him next week on the Resistor Vic podcast. Hope to see you there.